Too quick, I think it's not really a massive problem. I don't think anyone normally cares if we're too short.
Great. So, welcome everybody. Thank you for bearing with us there. I'm Caris Roberts. I'm Executive Director at IPPR, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our Big Ideas Debate. So today we're going to be talking about Labour's pledge to spend £28 billion per year to tackle the climate crisis. At IPPR, we're very excited about this pledge. We think it's really ambitious, the most ambitious policy on the table from political parties, I would say. And it's in fact very close to the amount, 30 billion, that we called for in our Environmental Justice Commission last year. So we were delighted to see Labour commit to that last year. Hopefully we're going to be hearing from Ed and from other politicians this week about some of the things that 28 billion is going to go on. But we thought to kick us off at conference, we would start with a discussion amongst you all and amongst some of our pitchers about what we think that money should be spent on. So with us today, we have a brilliant panel. We have three presenters. We have Hira Khan Adiogun, who is head of Car-Free Cities at Possible. We have Kate Bell, Head of Rights, International Social and Economics Department at the TUC, and Guy Shrubsole, a writer and campaigner. We then have our esteemed judges. So we have the Right Honourable Ed Miliband MP, Shadow Secretary of State for Climate Change and Net Zero. We have Fatima Ibrahim, Co-Executive Director of Green New Deal, and Luke Murphy, Associate Director for the Energy, Climate, Housing and Infrastructure team here at IPPR. So the way this is going to work, we are going to ask each of our pitchers to spend up to 5 minutes, and I am going to be strict. I have a bell from the museum, and I am prepared to use it. So I'm going, as demonstrated by my assistant. Yeah. So you're going to have 5 minutes each to pitch your idea, and then we're going to go to our judges who might have some questions, might have some comments. If we have time, and I will be keeping a strict eye on time, we'll also go to the audience for questions. I'm then, provided we do have time, I'm going to ask the audience if you have any ideas that you want to pitch. That will be even stricter. You'll have 2 minutes. So if you want to be part of that, then do be thinking throughout the event of what you can pitch in 2 minutes for the 28 billion. But before we get started, I did just want to turn to Ed first to lay the scene for us. So at this Labour conference, we've seen that Labour are going to be about a fairer, greener future. Does that mean climate is now firmly at the heart of the Labour agenda? And what can we expect this conference in terms of fleshing that out?
Definitely. Well, look, thank you very much, Caris, for hosting this event. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you to the audience for being here. I I sort of sometimes feel like a day at Labour conference is like a lifetime. So well done on getting through most of the first day. I also have worked out, this is really embarrassing, but I've worked out, this is my 28th Labour conference, which means an average of 5 days at each Labour conference is, I'm a bit of a nerd, 140 days. That means I spent 20 weeks at Labour conferences, or 5 months of my life. It has been worth every minute of it, obviously. Yeah, I mean, look, I think today is very important because of the 2030 zero carbon power commitment. It's the first of a number of announcements in this space. So watch this space for more of them. I think fundamentally the answer to your question is yes. I think we saw a budget on Friday which was had a very clear philosophy, which is the way you succeed as a country is rewarding the few, and essentially that will trickle down. We know that, they've been very open about their theory. It's a terrible theory, but they've been very open about it. We have a different theory, which is you've got to build an economy from the ground up, from the middle out. And I think that the climate investment pledge is an absolutely central part of it. Of course it is about decarbonisation. And I think what you'll see, but it's also about the economy. And I think what you're seeing with what we announced today is this four-part kind of idea about what can be achieved: lower bills, jobs, energy security, and climate leadership. And so my sort of pitch to the pitchers is that's what, at its best, the climate investment pledge can achieve.
Brilliant. Well, looking forward to more of the discussion as we get into the different ideas. First of all, we're going to start with Hira. So I'll ask you to take to the lectern, and your 5 minutes start when you're ready. Over to you.
Okay. Let me lay out the scene. We need to drastically slash our carbon emissions, and transport emissions are the largest source of CO2 emissions in the UK, and within that, private cars are the biggest single source contributor. But transport emissions have grown year on year from less than a fifth of UK greenhouse gas emissions 30 years ago to now more than a third. All credible net zero pathways show we got to slash demand. The level of traffic reduction we need to see over the next decade is unprecedented, and we can't just exclusively rely on a like-for-like replacement of motor vehicles with EVs. So where are we going to find the massive cut in traffic that we need? We should obviously look to our cities, where population density and the use of space mean things are typically within walking, wheeling, or cycling distance, and cost-efficient public transport provision should be easy. We need to see our political leaders acting as if we're in fact in a climate crisis. And without that, we're continuing to accept the harm that comes with cars: the toxic air, the collisions, the congestion, the lack of access to green space, the inactivity crisis, and social isolation. And these harms disproportionately impact ethnic minorities and the most vulnerable in our communities. Getting people to give up their cars is a major win, from economic productivity to better health to community cohesion and more. So, how should we spend the money? I've got 6 thoughts. First, we need an explicit traffic reduction target, a reduction in miles being driven by internal combustion engines. Sadiq Khan pledged a 27% reduction in car miles by 2030. The Scottish Government has pledged a 20% reduction. Car travel needs to fall by about 20 to 25% by 2030 to meet net zero ambitions, and it's time we started hearing it from Westminster. Secondly, we need to see a smart road user charging scheme to disincentivize driving and encourage people to take more sustainable alternatives. Currently, motorists stutter through our cities. It's bad for our health, a waste of time and precious resources. Instead, we need a comprehensive scheme that accounts for vehicle metrics that includes emissions, size, and weight, road categorizations, changing congestion levels, and public transport access levels in a local area. Importantly, we want to see a progressive tax that charges the wealthiest and those driving the most polluting vehicles more, with any money raised invested into public transport. Thirdly, we need to see massive investment in public transport across the board. We need to see the groundwork laid for electrified mass transit in every major UK city, so trolley buses, trams, metros, but when it comes to public transport, I'm going to concentrate on the humble bus. Buses need to be cheaper, they need to be more reliable, they need to be more accessible, they need to be more convenient, and they need to be fully electric. Can I get an amen from the congregation, please?
Amen.
Since privatization in the 1980s, fares have gone up and thousands of bus routes have been cut, leaving passengers stranded. Despite the failures of the past 30 years, this government is so ideological that it still thinks private bus companies know best. It's banned local councils in England from establishing new publicly owned bus companies, and boy, do we need public ownership. There are already a few publicly owned municipal bus companies in the UK doing fantastic work. It's the norm everywhere else in Europe, and it's time we got serious. I want to see fare-free buses run by municipal bus companies. Fourth, we've got to see a cycling revolution. Give everyone who wants one a free bike, give them somewhere to store it, give them free training, and ensure that most roads in our cities, even minor roads, rapidly prioritize space for protected cycleways over parked cars that sit unused for 95% of the time. Cycling is crucial to achieving our net zero targets, and safer cycle routes have the biggest impact in encouraging cycling. Build it, they will come. Fifth, everything that can be electrified should be electrified. That's ambulances, fire engines, EVs for carers. There's a tiny minority of people that will need to own private EVs, some disabled people, for example, but cutting cars in cities will make their lives easier too by leaving the roads clearer for them. And finally, replace the space taken up by cars with people and nature. So I'm talking new walking networks, greening the public realm, more parklets, more trees. This isn't pimp my ride, this is pimp my pavements, pedestrianizing plazas and high streets, the whole shebang. And after all that, I'm probably out of money, I might be out of time, but I hope I've left you wanting to live in a car-free city.
Woo, woo, woo! That was actually impeccable timing, so thank you very much. I'm going to turn to our judges, and with each of our panelists, I'll alternate who I start with. Who would like to kick off with this one? Fatima?
Yeah, it was hard to keep my bum on my seat because I just wanted to get up and be like, yay! You've sold me. I think you've sold all of us. My question was around, there's something you said at the beginning about people, most amenities being actually very close to people. And just to slightly challenge that idea, which is actually one of the issues that we have in our towns and our cities is planning. And so how could this sort of overlay with the idea of 15-minute cities or 15-minute neighborhoods where you have, things that are built where people can access everything they need within 15 minutes. And that feels like a crucial part in making car-free cities work.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. That's what we need to see is those 15-minute neighborhoods being built. I think I started off by saying that, where are we going to look for the traffic reduction we need? And it's obvious that it's going to come in cities because that's where, we're not asking people in rural wherever to, walk down the road and find everything. But in cities, that is possible. We need to start planning our neighborhoods in that way so local amenities have everything that they need that's easily accessible. And one point that I always come back to is, this intersects with gender, it intersects with carers, it intersects with the most vulnerable in our communities because when we think about, how to raise a child, for example, if we're serious about the fact that it takes a community to raise a child, traffic severs sense of community, it severs who we think are our neighbours, who we think is our community and our sense of place and home. And so, yeah, I'm basically agreeing with you. 15-minute neighbourhoods is the way forward.
Great. Luke?
Yeah, I mean, like Fatima, I was ready to shout amen before you even called on it, so I kind of fully agree. And we've done a lot of research that shows, on the current trajectory, we're going to have 10 million more cars on the road, and I don't think anyone wants to see that with all the kind of disbenefits in impacts that you pointed out. And also, I think the most startling fact is that, cars are parked nearly 90% of the time. What a waste of time, resources, and space. I guess my question is, I've heard some government advisors on other areas, I think Dieter Helm has said this before, that we're already on the trajectory to EVs. I think we've just got to stick to it, and you can't overcome this kind of, I'm not saying he necessarily says this bit, but the kind of, the attachment that people have to their cars and car dominance. I'm just interested to know what your response is to that. How do we change people's perceptions and that desire, the attachment of freedom that some people say that a lot of people have to their cars.
I mean, I think that's a really defeatist mentality. Our present doesn't have to dictate our future. And I think when, we do this exercise a lot, when we tell people to close their eyes and imagine the happiest place, their most beloved place, cars aren't in the picture. You kind of think about sun, and you think about grass, or you think about sand, you think about beach, you think about your family. You don't think about a tin box. And so I think where we are today has come through decades of policy. And policy can take us out of it as well. We need to start thinking about the long-term future. It's short-termism that's got us where we are. And I think at Possible, if I can toot my own horn, I think we do a really good job about that.
Excellent. Ed?
A really interesting presentation. Around the world, where are the places that you think are getting this right? Where are the cities that are getting this right?
Oh, so we have a Stories of Change map on the Possible Car-Free Megacities website, which shows loads of stories from all across the world. We've collated case studies from literally every continent where people are doing fantastic things. There's the obvious examples of, Amsterdam in the 70s is not the Amsterdam that we know today. It was policy that made them the cycling city. Paris has done fantastic things during the COVID lockdown, increased cycleways, hugely. I think Oslo has done a fantastic job. I think they had 0 deaths from cars in a year. They can do it, we can do it. There's lots and lots of places. I think there's lots of lessons to learn from across the world. We should be looking out there and collating these stories and bringing them here.
Great.
Any other questions from judges? And before you come back on that, I'll just take the second question here. I think there's a mic to Sarah, actually.
Thank you. I was also going to make the point about rural communities, but also when you talk about a progressive taxation of the most polluting vehicles, it's often the poorest who have the oldest and most polluting vehicles, and how are we going to bridge that gap? Thank you.
Great. 2 quite big questions there, so should we take those ones first?
Yeah, so our campaign specifically focuses on cities because, like I said, I'm not expecting people in rural communities to give up their cars when everything closes at 4:30. How are you supposed to get home? So I actually agree with you. So that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking for car-free cities. So for people who live in cities, and for people who don't live in cities, there should be places where you can basically park and ride to get into the city, and something that's convenient. But also for rural communities, I think bus services are the answer as well. Increased bus services, and sorry, bus. I'm going to keep saying it because it is the answer. And to your point around the poorest, that's what I mean about a progressive tax. I want the wealthiest driving the most polluting vehicles. The poorest people who...
So we've got one at the back there.
Hi, Rod Dowler. I just wondered where green hydrogen fitted into this picture, because I understand it's more suitable for heavy vehicles like buses.
And I think there's a hand that's been up for a while at the back. Yeah.
Hi there. I'm a councillor in Waltham Forest, so this has all been music to my ears in terms of 15-minute neighbourhoods and really driving the car-free agenda. I wondered, as part of your vision, what role you saw for car clubs, because I think while they're not necessarily an ideal end state locally, we've seen them as a really helpful way of getting people to break that direct relationship with owning a car and get used to the idea of not having a car full time while still having the comfort of relying on it for long journeys. And then separately, one of the challenges I think we all face when dealing with urban infrastructure that's been in place for a number of years is there are inherent trade-offs in the users of this space. One of the big challenges we've had in rolling out cycle lanes is at times that's had to come at the expense of bus lanes, at times it's had to come at the expense of making some of our pavements less accessible. As part of your vision, what kind of framework would you have in mind to help make those trade-offs in a way that makes sure we can always bring people and our residents with us in the process?
Great, and then one last question over here in the black and white sweatshirt.
Thank you. Just a question about long-term stability. If we achieve what you're setting out, how do we make it sustainable so that it's not kind of vulnerable to the winds of change when every government kind of comes and goes? If you look at the example of London, the tug of war between Downing Street and the City Hall over funding week to week the capital city's transport system, how do we build something that would be immune to that influence?
So quite a lot there. We've got green hydrogen, car clubs, the trade-offs between different kind of green modes of transport, and then the permanence sustainability question.
Okay, stop me.
You don't have to answer like literally all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the green hydrogen, I'm going to be really honest and say I don't know enough. When I've spoken to my colleagues at Possible, I think they would say that hydrogen, for most of the case uses, it doesn't quite work, but potentially for larger vehicles, it might work. I wouldn't have the information to be able to make a statement on that. On car clubs, I think car clubs are really important. I'm quite disappointed. I mean, well done to Waltham Forest for all the work that you've done. You've seen a great transformation in Waltham Forest. I think I'm really disappointed in how few councils are taking up car clubs and implementing car clubs and using them as a solution. And I think car clubs have a fantastic way of getting people to give up their own cars, to say that here's one car that you can use, you can share within your community, and ensuring that they're available and accessible is, I think, the kind of key thing. People want it to be available when they want it without having to walk much further. So I think that's a challenge. Can you remind me of the other two?
Trade-offs between kind of cycle lanes, bus lanes.
Yeah. I think it is interesting. There is this tension here between cycle lanes and bus lanes. There is no one size fits all. That's what I would say. It has to be with communities develop. We need to plan with communities to ensure that we're delivering work that is suitable for what they need. What I would say is that bus lanes do provide a level of protection for cyclists that don't necessarily work the other way. And we did a fantastic bit of work called Nobody Left Behind. I'd encourage everyone to check it out, where we looked at low-car visions, working specifically with disabled people, and we designed, we looked at kind of best practice when it came to bus stops in a way that it would work for disabled passengers, pedestrians, cyclists, the whole lot. So there are solutions to these problems. It doesn't need to be people, banging heads together kind of thing. And then was there a
final one? Was how do you make this permanent so it can't be ripped down?
How do we make it permanent? I mean, how did car culture become permanent? I think it was a huge cultural shift and people deciding that this way is better. And I think we can do that with the alternatives as well. I think if, it's not just about relying on policy, although I think policy plays a key role. It's also about changing culture, changing hearts and minds. And I think working with like arts companies, working with arts organizations, working with artists is a key bridge in that. Also working with community groups so that they live, they taste, they feel the difference within their own area. That makes it a lot harder to make change happen going the opposite direction.
Fantastic. Well, please join me in a round of applause for Hira. And next up, please welcome to the lectern, Kate.
Are you all right? If I can disentangle myself. Thanks. Thanks, everybody. So I am going for the techie but really, really important slot on this panel. And I'm going to try and convince you that what we need to do is to set up a public energy champion for the UK. And just as an added incentive for the panel, I'm going to throw in that you get to name it too. You can come up with a name for this new body. So as Ed said, I think we... That was not the bell. I can carry on going. Okay, so as Ed said, I think we've all got kind of pretty good consensus on the aims of our climate and energy policy now. We want secure and climate-safe power, we want more and better quality jobs, and we want affordable energy for families. But we need to just not be talking about these aims. We actually need to be putting in place the infrastructure that is going to deliver them. And I think, if we just keep talking about them, we're not going to get there. And I think to see why that is, you just have to look at the situation right now with offshore wind. So we've made really welcome progress in expanding the capacity of offshore wind in the UK. And of course, it's hard to find a better example of free power and of something that's obviously a common and public resource. But right now, we're seeing the benefits of that power privatised with very little debate. So profits from wind farms are being sent overseas to the foreign but state-owned companies who own and manage those wind farms. And at the same time, the opportunities to deliver jobs in local supply chains are being seized not by communities in France, Germany or Sweden, has meant that we're losing out on between 63 and 122. Those are possibly slightly too precise numbers, but we did do the maths. Many billions of pounds worth of revenue that we could have been using to lower our energy bills right now. So what would a public energy champion look like? Well, as I said, we've already got several of them operating in the UK. It's just that they belong to other countries. We've got EDF, and as everybody knows, in France, their national energy company has been able to lower their bills. They've also delivered best practice on job quality, and that's also the case where they operate in the UK. Whether it's transitioning from coal-fired power stations to championing diversity within their workforce, they've actually done a really good job. Of course, we've got the Danish Ørsted as well, formerly known as Dong. If you're thinking of, naming rights again, we could adopt that one maybe. But again, champions of some good quality when they're operating in Denmark, although again, not always in the UK. So we think that our public energy champion could be investing in the new generation we need. It would be doing that alongside the private sector, we think. And there's huge opportunities to do that. There's still a lot of offshore wind to be delivered in the UK. There's carbon capture and storage. There's hydrogen. We think we could be gaining the benefits of all of these and delivering a long-term return to UK citizens as well. And if we'd set up this public energy champion, of course, we'd give it a mandate to deliver the best quality jobs in the UK right across our supply chains. So in short, we think that the UK's new public energy champion could be by 2050 delivering up to a quarter of the UK's electricity needs. And it wouldn't just be delivering those, it would be delivering good jobs, lower bills, and a safe energy future. And I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kate. So I'll turn to judges first. Ed?
So as a really great presentation, I went to the largest onshore wind farm in England and Wales a couple of months ago. It's owned by Vattenfall. Vattenfall is 100% owned by the Swedish state. So the Swedish state is investing in this wind farm, and good on the Swedes. They're gonna be getting resources from this, but why shouldn't we be doing that? Kate, I wonder if you can sort of say something about sort of why has this happened in the UK? I mean, it's sort of, in a way, it's quite obvious, but what's the sort of history of these other countries that meant they've ended up with these public generating arms where we haven't? Is it a transition from oil and gas, or what's your sense about that? And then secondly, am I right in thinking that one of the benefits of this is not just the wealth question, but is also investing in the supply chains? Because I was talking to somebody about a hydrogen auction, which is going on at the moment, and he was saying to me, well, of course, the Norwegians have got their state company bidding for this UK hydrogen auction, and if they get it, they're going to be then investing in the Norwegian supply chain and electrolyzers and so on.
Absolutely on the supply chain point. In terms of why we don't have it, I think it's a question of kind of ideology and then sort of path dependency. So we privatised our energy companies back in the 80s for ideological reasons, not for technical reasons, not because the state cannot deliver decent power. And that means when those opportunities came up, we weren't ready. We also don't have that culture of industrial planning in the UK. We are not good at planning for the long term and thinking about how we seize those opportunities and make those opportunities deliver across multiple aims. So as I said, not just safe and secure energy, but also decent jobs in supply chains. But I think the really important thing for us now is it's not too late. Basically, as I said, we've still got a huge potential to deliver this energy. We've got a huge way in this transition to go, and it's absolutely vital that as that ramps up, and as it gets harder, in fact, we are showing it delivers benefits for people in the UK, whether that's in terms of jobs or lower bills, and that's why it's so important we put this in place now.
Brilliant, thank you. Fatima?
Yeah, Kate, this is a great idea, and considering the conference title, it would be nice if Labour came out with an announcement backing this week.
I'll see what I can do.
I mean, it's a no-brainer, and I think my question is, you talked about ideology, and actually one of the biggest things we have to contend with when you think about public ownership or investment in public services is ideology. The first thing people say is like, and I've heard people say, isn't EDF in massive debt? Can we trust a public provider to deliver the service quality that we need? How do we sort of win that ideological debate? Because it doesn't make sense to me, at least, that we look at the worst examples of public ownership when actually private ownership is not really delivering anything great.
Well, I think there's two really big things in our favour now in making the case. It's pretty clear that what we've got isn't working. Like, nobody thinks currently any of our aims in terms of what we want for an energy system is being met. But then I also think, particularly when we come to look at energy, I think people do understand that the state needs to have a role in strategic functions, basically. That we think what's important to us, our health system is important to us, and actually the government needs to have a role in that. Our public transport system, we would say, TUC's got a long campaign for the nationalisation of rail too, because that is of strategic importance. And what I think at the moment is happening is everybody can see just how important energy is right now and how important it's going to be in our future. And I think most people understand that, yes, as citizens, we need to have a stake in that too.
Brilliant. Luke?
I think, as you were saying, I think the most important point is the fact that, it is publicly owned, as you say, it just happens to be owned by other states. But I guess my question would be about, it goes back to actually someone was asking about the car-free cities, which is about longevity. So we obviously have a government at the moment who doesn't even, don't even think it's right to apply a kind of proper windfall tax to oil and gas giants. They're not suddenly about to set up what you're proposing. So I just wonder how you think, and is there any lessons from abroad that you can achieve that kind of consensus that means if there was a Labour government that set this up in future, that then might be carried on, and then you might be able to create a consensus around it. Is there anything we can learn from abroad about how that's been done?
I think that's a really good question, which I haven't thought about. I guess my initial answer would be, it would be about making sure that the organisation works with all its stakeholders, basically. So whether that's trade unions on the job front, whether it's other kind of private sector partners in terms of thinking about how you actually ensure it's delivering, what's needed for business. And actually how you do ensure there's a citizen voice there, a kind of consumer champion in delivering it. And I think putting those stakeholders in place in part of the governance of the organisation can be a really important way of both getting the feedback you actually need on, is it doing the job we've set it up to, but embedding that consensus more widely. But I do think, once you make these big changes, if you think about, the other way, and it's a bit like what Hira was saying about car-free cities, we privatised our energy system and then that's just kind of sat there as the consensus. We're saying, let's just flip that round. Let's have the consensus the other way.
Can I ask one more? Actually, it's about the ownership model. It's about whether you've done a lot of thinking about whether it's kind of national government ownership, is it cooperative? Have you thought about how it might be owned and the structure of the ownership? Because there are obviously different benefits. You're speaking about the worker involvement, obviously different ones can involve citizens and workers in different ways.
So we've suggested that this would be an investment model, basically. So it's about, and we also have a separate idea I could have pitched, which is about our kind of retail energy system being in public ownership too. And I think there's a bit more thinking to be done about how you actually integrate them. But what we want is that national champion which can take the stakes. And then I think, very up for the ideas about the best way to structure that.
Any final questions or thoughts from our panel? Great, in which case I will take some questions from the audience. So I will take the two questions at the front here to start with.
Thank you. So you said that we still have time to do it. By that, do you mean like 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? Like, could I have an estimate?
And one more question here. Sorry, okay, I've picked someone who you can't quite see.
Sorry. My name's Jack Abbott, and I'm a parliamentary candidate for Ipswich, and also I work in the renewable energy sector, so I've got very much a vested interest in what I'm about to ask. So at the moment, the renewable energy industry, much like many other sectors in the UK, the jobs and market value we do have in the UK is still overwhelmingly dominated by London. And Ipswich and Suffolk, for example, are going to be hosting Sizewell C. We've got a huge amount of offshore wind, huge new solar farm coming online, plus a bunch of other technologies. but we don't always see the benefit in terms of jobs and investment being localised as well. So I guess my question is if places like Suffolk, which I think on Sizewell nuclear alone is going to host about 10% of the entire UK's energy needs, how do we make sure that the jobs and investment are not only retained in the UK, but also retained in the communities who are also hosting these huge energy projects as well?
Great, thanks for the questions. In terms of timescale, I think we could get it established quickly, and then the idea would be to scale up, basically. So you'd start kind of investing, and then hopefully scale up that investment with some kind of learning of what was working, developing the expertise of your staff, and then you hope it's there for the long term. So, you know, you can probably get the body established in a year, and then, as we were saying with Luke, you know, hopefully that's there for the long term. In terms of kind of ensuring the benefit to communities in the UK, I think it's absolutely critical that this would have a mandate to deliver UK supply chains. And we have actually seen a tiny bit of that, you know, to give the government its due. It has got kind of local content requirements in offshore wind. They're not mandatory so far, and to be fair, they're not really delivering yet. So I think it's about saying this is an absolute aim of this. They've got to be going to local communities, and that's going to be one of the key outputs on what they're monitored on, because, yeah, we'll only see the benefits and people will only believe in the benefits if those jobs are actually coming home.
Great. I'll take some more questions if they are there. So there's one at the back here, just next to you, Ollie.
Hello. Hello, Sarah Halliwell from Derbyshire Dales. I'm a town councillor there. I guess it's more a plea for community and cooperative based energy projects, that it would be wonderful if this energy champion was able to set some best practice where groups of people on the ground in their local communities could drive forward. And I would, you know, taking from the questioner at the front saying about cooperative models where we own the energy production in our community, kind of could you comment on that? Because I think it does give us some protection over changes of government in the future if we've got some of it. Have you got any thoughts as a trade union?
And then just one more question, if there's another one, just in the middle here. Just put your hand up again in the grade. Yeah, there we go.
On onshore wind, there seems to be a portion of the electorate that are uncomfortable. How do you think we've found ourselves here, and what's the way out?
Okay, those are two tough questions. On the first one, I think this is going to sound like a cop-out, but there are different, you know, different types of energy are going to need different models. And I think it is really important to recognise that we do have some things where we need to invest at scale, and we need to be investing nationally, basically. And I don't think we should be shying away from that. Some of the kind of community energy companies which have been set up haven't been able to operate at scale, and, you know, market failures, many issues going on. But I think it is really important that we're looking at the business case as well, you know, for the scale on which we should be investing. But there definitely will be a role for some community involvement. On the onshore wind debate, I don't know is the real answer. Luke says he knows.
Well, I was just going to say one thing, which was actually onshore wind is phenomenally popular. More than 80% of people support it, and that increases in communities where there is an onshore wind farm nearby because it lowers their bills in the local community. It's phenomenally popular. It's just very unpopular in a very narrow group of people who happen to be in government at the moment.
Although I think we should,
exactly right.
We should note that, you know, we were just talking on the panel actually beforehand that the one tiny silver lining of Friday's horrific mini budget was the government do seem to be permitting onshore wind.
Yeah. And Luke, is that tiny set of people, are they also the people that live next to those sites? Is it a kind of...
You're more likely to be in favour of onshore wind if you live near an onshore wind turbine than if you don't, actually, in terms of the polling. I mean, Luke is completely right. There's a mythology about this. It's unpopular. If you look at the recent Bayes polling, what's the most unpopular potential power source? It's fracking, by miles.
Great. Okay, well, thank you for fielding those questions, Kate. And please join me in a round of applause for Kate. And next up, it's over to Guy.
Thanks very much, Caris. Right. Well, first, let me preface this by saying I'm really excited by Labour's new climate plan. It's obvious that Labour does get climate now, and I'm really excited to find out more details of what's happening this week and more announcements I'm sure that have come. But there's another problem on the horizon. We're witnessing an absolutely existential threat to nature protections in Britain. The last couple of days have seen an astounding attack by this government on nature protections, on future farm subsidies, and on the environment. And they've managed to, Liz Truss's frankly deranged plans, have managed to alienate not only the RSPB, the Wildlife Trust, but also the National Trust. Do you know how many people are members of all of those organisations put together? That is an enormous swathe of the electorate that is now waiting for Labour to take them on and to win their votes. If, I think, Labour gets serious on nature. And that's what my pitch is about. So let me begin. When Franklin Delano Roosevelt brought in his New Deal in the 1930s, he didn't only seek to transform America's power system and industry, he also saw that his country's land was beset by crisis too. And in response to the Dust Bowl, an ecological catastrophe brought about by ploughing up the fragile soils of the Midwest, Roosevelt founded the Civilian Conservation Corps, and he oversaw a massive tree planting program across America. And today, in our fight against the climate and nature crises, that requires us to not only decarbonize our energy system, our transport, and our homes, but also to transform the way that we use our land. So my pitch for how Labour should spend its £28 billion climate investment pledge is to bring in a new deal for nature. And it's clearly vital that we radically slash carbon emissions or everything we're pumping into the atmosphere. But if we're actually to reach net zero and to get us back to a safe climate, we actually also need to take carbon out of the atmosphere. Rather than betting on technologies that don't yet exist to do this, things that Dominic Cummings and Elon Musk might try and dream up, why don't we actually reach out to nature? Nature has been spending millions of years creating the exact sorts of things that we need to take carbon out the atmosphere. It's called peat bogs. They lock up 3 billion tons of carbon in the UK, and woodlands which store roughly 1 billion tons of carbon. Natural carbon sinks suck CO2 out the air and lock it away safely. And done right, restoring nature can also help us address that other parallel crisis that we face, nothing less than the unraveling of the web of life itself. Rejuvenating nature also allows us to generate tens of thousands of new jobs in conservation, in forestry, nature-friendly farming, and in tourism, and create habitats that all of us can enjoy for our leisure and health and well-being. Now, land in Britain today is owned by a remarkably small number of people. Around 1% of the population own half the land in England. And too often, it's badly mismanaged. So in the process of transforming how we use land, let's also allow more of the public to take a stake in owning it. So my proposed New Deal for nature would involve doing 5 key things. Firstly, we would set up a new national nature service to train up a new generation of ecologists, conservationists, foresters, and farmers skilled in agroecology. Secondly, we would restore our peat soils, our single largest carbon store. Currently, around 150 people own England's upland peat soils, containing roughly 500 million tons of carbon. And you might have thought that these landowners would treat such an incredibly important set of habitats with the utmost care. But no. These wealthy landowners and city bankers every year literally set fire to our largest carbon store for the sole purpose of shooting grouse. The people of Hebden Bridge get flooded as a result of these malpractices, and the people of Greater Manchester get smoked out of their homes whenever a moorland fire gets out of control. So thirdly, a New Deal for nature would bring in a community right to buy land for nature, so that communities can, for example, take back control of the grouse moor upstream that's leaking carbon and causing their homes to flood, and turn it instead into a community-owned nature reserve and natural flood defence. Fourthly, let's grow more trees, our second largest carbon store. We have enough land to double England's tree cover without impacting on peat soils or protected sites or good quality farmland. And let's do it particularly in our green belts so that we can create new community forests for people to enjoy and go and spend time in. And fifthly, lastly, as part of that reforestation mission, we should bring back Britain's lost rainforests. Rainforests in Britain? Yes, you heard that right. They don't actually just occur in tropical countries. We have temperate rainforests here in Britain. And Britain's famously wet and rainy climate makes us one of the world's best places for temperate rainforests to thrive. around a fifth of the country has a suitable climate for rainforest. Unfortunately, many of them were cut down centuries ago. And so there are still fragments left. And so, if you've never been to one, I'd thoroughly recommend going and visiting one, because they're absolutely incredible places. They're actually teeming with life, green all year round because of the mosses and lichens and ferns that cling to their branches. They're incredibly magical places to be in. And at present, these tiny fragments of rainforest are threatened by overgrazing, by habitat isolation, and by invasive species. But the wonderful thing is that nature has an extraordinary ability to spring back. So if we allow them to expand again, if we control overgrazing on the edges of our rainforests, in common with our other woods, they would start to return. So we can allow them to regenerate and spread and bring back Britain's lost rainforests. Franklin Roosevelt once said, "The nation that destroys its soil destroys itself." So by restoring our peat soils, our trees, and our rainforests, a New Deal for nature would not only help us fight the climate and nature crises and generate new jobs, it would also help restore hope and purpose to the land of Britain.
Thank you, Guy. And I might force you to do some self-promotion and wave around that book that I can see on the floor there. Cool, The Lost Rainforest.
This hasn't got a really nice cover on it, which is by the fantasy artist Alan Lee, who has illustrated Tolkien. So once you get the actual one, it's got a much better cover than that.
And can people find it in all good bookshops?
They can find it on the 27th of October, when it's published.
Excellent. So over to our judges. Luke.
Thanks very much, Guy. And I'd just say, I mean, I found the campaign you're running on the lost rainforest of Britain really inspirational. So it's kind of well done on the campaign. I think my question would be that there's obviously a narrative at the moment that somehow growth, development, we know we've got a housing crisis. We do need to build more homes. We need to build more infrastructure. We have lots of problems with that. That actually the answer to this, well, certainly the current government seems to be the answer to it. Is to roll back environmental protections. Is it true that there is a trade-off between nature and that kind of development that we need to see? Is there a trade-off there?
No,
can you do both?
It's 100% untrue, and they've created a completely false dichotomy. The idea that we're going to somehow solve the housing crisis by destroying, newts and toads and badgers is absolutely crazy. The problem, actually, with the reason why we don't have affordable housing is the price of land. And actually, no government to date has tried to seize and grasp the nettle of this problem, apart from, of course, the post-war Labour government. And when the post-war Labour government actually brought in, when they brought in the planning system, they actually brought in a community charge at the same time, or a way of doing this in a way that actually said, well, the landowner has to pay the community back for some of the value of the land. And that's actually what we need to be having again, is a form of land value tax, a way in which we actually don't just allow landowners to clean up and make huge profits, but instead to have affordable housing provided by councils, provided by social housing, where they're not having to pay a huge amount for land.
Great. Ed?
Incredibly compelling, Guy. You're brilliant on this subject and really great ideas. Just because it's sort of very live, say something about, because I think it's useful for the audience, about what the government is, sort of direction they're going in the last couple of days. I mean, they're essentially going back to the common agricultural policies, in a nutshell.
They're going back to the Stone Age. I mean, basically, in the process of 3 days, they have announced not only that they want to rip up all remaining EU environmental regulations that are left on the statute book, and obviously that also includes all the health and safety legislation, all workers' rights and working time. That's absolutely horrendous. We need huge solidarity across sectors to fight this and to say this absolutely cannot happen. Day 2, they came out with basically saying we're going to have these the so-called investment zones, which are basically sound like they're going to be duty-free, tax-free areas, which there's going to be no planning rules or something, and they're going to sort of bulldoze through a whole bunch of things that their developer mates can put up without paying tax. And thirdly, just today we've heard they are going to essentially get rid of all of the reforms to farm payments that people have spent years trying to finally get in place. Possibly, if I can say this, possibly the one silver lining of Brexit would have been a reform to a very inequitable common agricultural policy farm payment system, which essentially rewards landowners for owning vast swathes of farmland. The Duke of Westminster, James Dyson, city bankers who all rake in public money, £3 billion every year, This has to be reformed. It has to be reformed, and actually this government was starting to do that, and now the current administration looks to be completely rolling back on that, and again, bunging money towards large landowners.
Guy, I mean, I'm so glad you mentioned the New Deal, and I think all three of these ideas are Green New Deal policies, and they do the work of, both allowing us to secure a livable future and, rehabilitating our nature, allowing us to avert climate crisis, but also creating great co-benefits of jobs and lives where we can thrive and build connections with nature or be able to get around. I guess my question is, and the thing that when it comes to nature is, again, it's the cultural piece, which is we're so disconnected from nature. And actually, part of it is because of access. Ownership, to me, feels like the heart of the problem. Even going to Scotland, you can see there's a different connection to nature just because of the right to roam. I've talked a lot about, I grew up in Canada in my early years, and, nature is part of the Canadian national identity, right? And so how do we disrupt the ownership model, particularly at this time where we see, we're talking about wealth redistribution. The biggest redistribution that needs to happen is land in this country. And some of the biggest owners of land are the sovereigns of this country. And so how do we use this moment, to kind of spark a cultural revolution where we talk about redistribution beyond just wealth in the abstract, but through land redistribution, and how would we facilitate that?
Well, I thought it was brilliant that Lisa Nandy the other week came out supporting a community right to buy in England. And that's something that Scotland has had for the last 20 years. It's been working fantastically. It's been rejuvenating rural communities in Scotland. It's been allowing them to take back control of land, which was seized off of many communities in Scotland as a result of the Highland clearances. The same happened here in England with the enclosures. It happened over hundreds of years, and the big landowners nicked loads of land off of us commoners. And so essentially a way back to that is to introduce a community right to buy, but not just so that you can take control of your local pub or town, community centre. As important as those things are, I do think this needs to go beyond that to taking back control of land overall, and I think that can be done through an extension of what Lisa Nandy has already outlined and what Labour has already outlined. Oh, and also an extension to the right to roam as well, just to get that in there.
Fantastic. So we will turn to questions from our audience, and I think there's one at the back there.
Its main question is about trees. That if we're asking people to offset their travelling to plant trees, my worry is, and the general feeling that trees are one of the solutions, my worry is that we plant new trees and then we have a drought and the saplings dry, or we have a fire and the trees burn. It's not the only solution. It's not the brilliant solution that many people think it is. And I'd like to ask you whether you could say something about soil generally. As I'm from County Durham, and County Durham have done a great job so far with improving the peat bogs, re-wetting the peat bogs. And I think it's soil generally that maybe people need to understand is basic for sequestering carbon. And my only other comment is that the wealthiest landowner in this country is the royal family. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And there's another question at the back.
Yeah, hi. Just as a young renter, I'm asking about Tawit's question about the housing crisis, but particularly sort of the politics of it. How do you prevent, and for want of a better word, NIMBYs from grasping onto this and saying, right, that derelict car park could actually be a rainforest? Obviously not to that extent. But is it in the classification of land? Is it in how you politically put this across? What differentiates a potential rainforest from a brownfield site that you could build on? Thanks.
Great. I'll let you take those two first.
Government's energy plan is already kicking in.
Wave or something.
On trees, I wouldn't advocate planting them to offset carbon at all. We shouldn't be offsetting emissions going up into the atmosphere as a result of fossil fuel companies and fossil fuel companies burning fossil fuels. We should be planting trees in and of itself to take the carbon that's already up there and get rid of it and lock it up in safely out of harm's way, because there's already too much up there. This is about doing something additional that's good in and of itself, not just sort of assuaging the guilt of someone going around the world or of fossil fuel companies trying to offset their emissions. I think it's great that if councils are starting to do things to restore peat bogs in County Durham. I think, unfortunately, County Durham also contains the wonderful landowner Viscount Matt Ridley, a massive climate denier who also owns a grouse moor there and will happily be burning it come the burning season again. So we need to contend with people like that. I think when it comes to something like housing, I really, really don't want us to get into a situation where we imagine that having that affordable housing is at the expense of nature or is in conflict with nature. As I said earlier, what is really in conflict here is the profits of developers and the council's current inability to be able to buy land cheaply to be able to create affordable housing. At the moment, if a council wants to buy a plot of land, in a brownfield site in the middle of a city that's currently vacant, they have to pay through the nose for it. It's a huge the amount of uplift that a developer gets, that a landowner gets through being able to say, well, that's got development rights on it, and therefore I'm going to charge you a huge amount for it, is enormous. Whereas actually councils used to be able to, between the 1940s and the 1960s, councils used to be able to buy land at existing use prices, and that was because of the Labour government, and that has to happen again in future. And in terms of how, where actually the land that often is best for nature is often actually very remote as well from where people are living. It's often some of the least productive farmland in the uplands, places where there is not a trade-off between food production and nature either. So I think we have space in this island for all of these things. It's just that we're not properly managing it at all at the moment.
Great. I'm going to take one or two more questions. I've got one at the back there. And sorry, it's quite dark now, so I can't actually see you all.
Thank you. Victoria Hills Royal Town Planning Institute. A lot of the great ideas that have been debated and suggested now, and very, very good ideas, have a very spatial sort of planning context to them. We've heard a lot of talk on planning reform. You've talked about getting hold of the land, which is really important. The next thing is how we use it. So just wondered if you've got any ideas on how we might do that a bit better in the context of planning reform. Thank you.
Great. And one more question. Hand them to the front, so I'll take this question at the front here. Sorry, Ellie, I'm just making you do exercise.
Thanks. I'd love to hear more about your vision for the National Nature Service. I'm helping to run a pilot called the UK Year of Service, which is giving about 300 young people currently real living wage paying jobs, doing things like in nature, but also in sort of home insulation, green energy, and also things a bit more widely across public services. Would love to hear, so we're sort of focusing on 18 to 24-year-olds. Would love to hear how you would sort of envision such a scheme.
Yeah, sure. Just on the planning question, I think one of the things that actually is quite remarkable about England specifically within the UK context and internationally is that we don't actually have a plan for how we use the vast majority of our land. Scotland and Wales have this. They introduced land use strategies some years ago. But actually the only thing that we have in England is how we use the land on which things are built, on which housing and shops and so on are built. The other 80 to 90% of England is actually not built on, and we actually don't have any strategy for how that is managed and used. So a land use strategy, for Labour to come out in favour of a land use strategy, would be enormously powerful and would help us to think much more clearly about how we resolve the nature and climate crises, resolve overall allocation of space, how to work out how do we do transport planning better. And on a National Nature Service, well, this is in fact, I have to say, not my idea at all. I nicked it wholly from the conservation groups who brought out this idea a couple of years ago. In fact, they pitched this idea, groups like RSPB and the Wildlife Trust, to this government with a plan for how to create 10,000 jobs immediately in 2020, and of course the government ignored it. So it's there, it's right for the taking. I think we should, I'd be very interested to talk to you afterwards and hear more about what you're doing. But I think it's something we should be absolutely seizing on and something that Labour should fund through its climate pledge.
Fantastic. Well, please join me with a round of applause for Guy. So we've heard from three brilliant speakers pitching their ideas, and we are going to hear again from our judges on their kind of overall assessments towards the end of the event. However, we do have a bit of time now to hear from you. So like I said, I can see some smiley faces there, so everyone's keen. I'm going to ask for people to put their hands up so I can see how many ideas we've got. And I won't be able to get to everybody, but we'll try and make it as kind of quick fire as we can. So you've smiled at me so enthusiastically. I'm going to pick this gentleman over here first. Oh, and I will be very strict, so if you hear the dinger.
Okay, I'll try and be really quick. Hi, I'm Graham Hughes, the world's most travelled Scouser, the only person to go to every country in the world without flying, and I also founded Global Scouse Day, so that was me. Thank you. Right, so this is my plan, and you can do it. You can start on this tomorrow, and it's not going to cost 28 billion. It's not going to cost you anything, actually. What we do is we harness the power of the friendly rivalry between Liverpool and Manchester, right? And what we set up is the carbon neutral project, or the carbon natural project, like a natural, sea natural, like the musical symbol, right? Because the rivalries are football and music. And what we do is we have a prize fund of £1 billion, which is paid for by the fossil fuel companies. They can put their money where their mouth is, beyond petroleum my arse. And what you do is you say which city, which metropolitan area, talk to Steve, talk to Andy, gets to net zero first, gets the £1 billion. That's it. End of. Thank you.
Admirably concise, thank you. Do any of our judges, or indeed our pitchers, have any questions or comments on that one?
I mean, I love the
I'm
idea.
voting for him. I'm definitely voting for him.
Pitching Manchester and Liverpool. I will say I was chased around Liverpool once wearing a Man United shirt, so I know that power works.
I'm voting for him.
Great. As I feel I have to say on behalf of IPPR North, of course, competitive funding pots are not always the most efficient. But I don't think anyone wants to hear that right now. So, more pictures. Can I see hands, please? Great. So I will come to this gentleman in the middle here first.
Hi. So I will have some difficulty topping that, I have to. But I feel a good move would be to invest in working from home. We saw a lot of reduction in emissions during the COVID pandemic, and for all that was a very miserable experience. It achieved some very small silver linings. The Tories seem very much convinced the only way forward is to get us all back into the office. I think that's a mistake. There's a lot of office space which could be redeveloped and used for better purposes like housing. We could invest in internet access for a lot of people. That was a huge issue in the pandemic, and that could help really make Britain more digital, open up opportunities in the workplace. It's a small thing, but I think it would help if we really did focus on working from home.
Thank you very much.
I mean, more of a comment really, but it is something that other countries are doing. I think Ireland has changed its taxation regime to encourage working from home. It is actually something that other countries are looking at. So I think it's definitely something that perhaps Labour and the government could look at.
I think Jacob Rees-Mogg is unlikely to go for it.
But it's not something that works in isolation, right? One of the reasons people didn't like working from home is because we were stuck at home in homes that weren't built for us spending that much time in them, or in communities that didn't give us access to green spaces. And so if we took up Guy's idea of giving us more access to nature and investing in nature, then we could work from home because we'd like where we lived, and our home environments would give us, nourishing days in our week. So yeah, I love that idea, but I think it comes with a parcel of rethinking how we live.
And I have a question for you, actually, if I may abuse my position as chair, which is beyond investing in broadband and fast internet access, what would that actually look like? What can the government do to shift that?
Well, an immediate thing I can think of is to improve home offices and home systems in that regard. to perhaps stop employers from discrimination in this regard. So I know that some employers very much do prefer the office environment and might try and pressure workers into coming back to the office, sort of thing. Well, you should really come along to all these meetings, make it very unpleasant for them. Putting a stop to that would be a good start, I think.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I'm going to come next to the lady at the back there.
I would like you to help insulate the poorest housing stock in Britain. I think we need to retrofit. I think it borders on criminal that we are not addressing the worst housing in this country, and it would help the poorest in our country and those who are cash poor. So I'm for incentives and new jobs around insulation yesterday. Thank you.
I think you might struggle to find anyone on the stage who disagrees, but does anyone want to comment?
Completely right. 100% right.
Excellent.
Biggest no-brainer there is in policy making.
Great. I'm going to take one or two more because people are admirably keeping to time. So I've got a question in the front here in the purple.
I think this is in addition to your 28 billion, but I think that I think we should be investing in loss and damage and financing for other countries to support their adaptation mitigation, because when it comes to climate change, we are actually not an island, and we also carry a historic responsibility to other countries for the amount of emissions that we have imposed on them through colonialism and other means. And so I think we should be committing, and I think Labour should be committing to significant money to finance loss and damage and adaptation worldwide.
I mean, just to respond, I mean, I think that was one of the biggest disappointments from COP26, and it was actually one of the big commitments that the developed nations made at COP26 to say, you know, this is something we're going to look at seriously, and there is a massive expectation from developing countries that that is going to happen at COP27, and the commitment is not there. So I think the government does need to be held to account to this commitment, because I think Alok Sharma actually is in a slightly different place to the rest of the government, and he is deeply committed to the agenda, but unfortunately the rest of the government isn't there. So I completely agree, and that should be, you know, that is going to lead to a really downbeat, disappointing, to say the least, COP27 in Egypt if further progress isn't made on loss and damage. So yeah, completely agree.
Anybody else?
I mean, and really timely too. I mean, loss and damage. Just look at Pakistan. That's what loss and damage is. When you have a country who is experiencing a third of their country underwater, it's not just about, you know, losing land or losing your homes. I mean, loss and damage, people will lose their cultures. People won't be able to return to their homes. How do we compensate them for that? And that needs to start happening right now. And I think it was a shame that governments didn't deliver it in COP26. It's also a shame that it's not a heart of our national debates and that we're not winning the argument with the public. And we need to be leading from the front and saying, actually, the way we deal with climate change is not just about, you know, rethinking our own systems, but at the same time, you know, paying back countries who we've built our own country off the back of and who desperately need to adapt now. And so I think it's both, you know, the money, but also the leadership of leading from the front and taking the public with us that we need from our politicians.
Fantastic, thank you. I think I saw one more question at the front here. The same question. Okay, in which case I'll come to this person here.
My question actually is, I'm actually a councillor as well, and one of the things we have is some of our older, is in Basingstoke, we've got a lot of old housing estates that are sort of getting quite run down. And it would be lovely to see some investment given to local government, local authorities, so they can actually, with a very green agenda, start sorting out some of the sort of the green spaces, and also where we've got sort of that regeneration around that. And one thing I looked at, for example, that hasn't been mentioned, we talk about soil sequestration, so it's things like clover instead of grass, and other sort of initiatives like that. I have lots of residents say we'd like to have wildflower areas and things like this, community orchards, all of that stuff, and it's really hard getting funding for those sort of things. So having some money coming the way to local authorities so they can do this sort of thing, I think would be brilliant. Thank you.
I don't know if you want to say anything about our Environmental Justice Commission.
Yeah, so I should have been using the opportunity to promote it all evening. Thanks for reminding me. We ran a commission that had citizens' juries across the country, and one of the biggest things that came out of that was that people want to see more control, more resources, and more ability to decide for themselves how they're going to tackle climate change in their area, how they're going to restore nature. I know Ed talks a lot on retrofit about the need for a street-by-street approach. We're not going to insulate local communities' housing from a desk in Whitehall. It has to be led from town halls and communities across the country, and the same goes for nature restoration. So a big part of this isn't just about spending the 28 billion centrally. One of our key findings from citizens was that, yeah, it has to be spent and controlled locally. So completely agree with you.
Fantastic. So what an array of ideas we have covered there, both by our pitches on the stage, but also from all of you. So thank you very much. I'm going to turn to each of our judges now as we close to reflect on what you've heard and to say which of these you think really should be the priority.
What if we like them all?
So I'm going to force you to try and prioritise. So I'm not saying you have to vote for one and one only. In previous years, we've done an audience vote, and Ed told me it was too neoliberal. and there was no silver bullet to the climate crisis. So this time, I
was right.
I won't force people to do that, but I would like to get a sense of that kind of prioritisation, because 28 billion, it's a large number, but it doesn't actually go as far as you might think. So Luke.
You sound like the sort of chief secretary to the Treasury. It's very impressive, actually.
Luke, do you want to start?
So yeah, obviously I like them all, particularly the gentleman's over there. Apart from the competitive funding point, I think that that was potentially the standout idea. But what was interesting was that so much of it, I'm plugging it again, was the question of what was pitched on the stage, but also from the audience, is actually reflected in our report for the Environmental Justice Commission, which Ed was a co-chair. So I liked many of the ideas. I think the one that I would put over and above them all, if I had to select one, is probably Guy's pitch around nature. And the reason being is not because it's necessarily any more important than the others, but I do think the state of the public debate is in a different place on nature. I think what was interesting about the juries we did when we spoke to the public was that there was a deep sense of connection with nature. They were shocked in a way in which they weren't. So, we spend these juries presenting the evidence on climate and nature and allow them to, propose a plan for what a fair transition looks like. There was actually quite a lot of shock about the kind of damage that we're doing to our environment and the state that it's in. And for that reason, and the priority that the public put on it, for all the benefits that Guy set out, from health and well-being to economic, to its ability to reduce emissions and tackle the climate challenge, I'd probably put nature up there and as the first one for me.
Thank you. Fatima?
Well, it's been a great evening, and I think what makes me hopeful is that we're not lacking ideas. We're just lacking sometimes the leadership to get us there and to really be imaginative and to be willing to lead the public debate. Bar the idea that came from Hannah about investing and, really writing the check for loss and damage and adaptation, which should be done on the first day of a Labour government. Almost all of the other ideas touched on this idea of ownership. And for me, 28 billion doesn't go far, but with that 28 billion, we're not thinking about how do we make system change, something that gives us bang for our buck and rewrites how we run our societies and doesn't challenge ownership models, then what we're doing essentially is putting money into a system that's not really working. And so if we want that 28 billion to go far, Labour needs to sit down and think about, how do we reimagine ownership at every level of society, one that sort of has democracy at its heart, that prioritizes people and planet over profit. That's how we make sure that 28 billion goes far. I hate that I have to pick amongst these ideas because, I spend all of my day working on the Green New Deal, and these are Green New Deal ideas. We need all of them. But I have to, I've thought about it for a second, and the reason I'm going to pick Guy's idea of a New Deal for nature is I think it's the one that allows us to, have a tipping point when it comes to bringing the public into this long-term journey of us transitioning to a net zero world. I think it's the one that can build public appetite. If we get people excited about nature, it can create jobs, it can make people feel connected to this planet that we're trying to save. And so because it's already popular, but it also forces really important conversations about ownership in a space that already is quite alive with public appetite. So I think that's why, because it makes the other ideas possible.
Great. And one of the things I've loved about all the pitches actually is that you've all sought to think about how the economy can change and how society can change as part of them. I think that's been a brilliant part of the discussion.
I love them all. I think it's too neoliberal to pick one. No, I genuinely love them all. Can I just offer 3 reflections on this? Because I think they're absolutely fantastic, and the audience ideas have been fantastic too. What I think is so interesting about this, and in a way a challenge for us all, is all of these ideas are about better lives for people. And I think it's really, really important to sort of hold on to this, because so much of the debate the media wants to conduct is still in a totally different frame, which is how much sacrifice is going to be made in order to save the planet. And I think we all collectively have a massive task to shift that frame. I mean, even today's announcement, trying to explain to people that actually 2030 zero carbon power is like, it saves money for people on bills. It's not more expensive because green power is much cheaper than fossil fuels. And so I think what I love about all the ideas is that they are about saying to people that these are better lives. Secondly, they're big ideas, and I think we should go big, as I wrote in a book, which you can still buy. And the third part of this, I think, is that they in different ways envisage a kind of different kind of order of society. And I think this is a really important thing to hold on to. Kate's idea about the public energy company is a very different way of doing things than the last 30 or 40 years. The idea about car-free cities, about how we change the way we live and work, and 15-minute cities and all that, is a different way of organizing things. Guy's ideas on nature, similarly, and if I can just offer this sort of observation, kind of uplifting observation. I said at the beginning I'd been to 28 Labour Party conferences. I know when the mood in the air is despair, I know when the mood in the air is uncertainty, and I know when the mood in the air is expectation. And I think we should have a sense of expectation, because I think that, politics does go in cycles, and you obviously have to work to affect those cycles, but this lot are completely beatable. These stories are totally beatable. And with ideas like the ones we've heard tonight, we can beat them.
So it just falls to me to say a huge thank you to everybody who's been involved in tonight. It's been a hugely inspiring and uplifting conversation. It's our first event of conference, and I couldn't feel more energized by it, so thank you. A huge thank you to all of our judges, to Luke, to Fatima, to Ed. A huge thank you to our pitchers, to Hira, to Kate, to Guy, and a huge thank you to all of you for coming along and for such brilliant ideas. Please do come along to all of our events. We've got a jam-packed schedule over the next few days. Do follow our work, particularly the work that Luke leads on climate and nature. And I hope you have a great conference and that we see some brilliant big ideas come out in the next few days. Yeah. Thank you.
Very good.